Hello and welcome back to Inside Vehicle Architecture. In our debut episode, we explored the fundamentals of vehicle architecture and its profound impacts. And today we're going to delve deeper into how these sort of fundamentals shape and differentiate various vehicle classes. In this episode, we'll break down the core difference between different vehicle classes. So I'd say difference between internal vehicle, sort of combustion engines, ICE vehicles, hybrids, electric vehicles, and even fuel cell vehicles. What we want to explore is how each of this, or at least each type, is unique in today's automotive landscape, and how these architecture plays a pivotal role in defining the performance and capabilities. Now, I have my good friend Raul again with me. So, Raul, thanks for joining me again. Let's start examining these vehicles and uncovering what sets them apart, what differentiates them.
Sure. And thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. But the main distinction in vehicles, as you said, is whether or not it has an engine. So on one side, you have vehicles that have an engine. The basic model is ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles, and then you have hybrids. There's also a start-stop system that helps reduce emissions because the engine shuts off when the vehicle's idling. But I wouldn't consider this in the as a different type of vehicle. And so when you think about hybrid vehicles, you're talking about just different levels of hybrid where they have a battery pack and that allows them to operate as an electrical vehicle for some period of time. And so you have mild hybrids, full hybrids. Again, it's the range and the speed. The big difference really is in the plug-in hybrids because the plug-in hybrids, those are the ones that, on one hand, you do have to connect and actually charge the batteries, but that gives you really a longer range and the ability to use it as an electrical vehicle for, higher speed versus mild hybrids, etc. There is a limit of speed and obviously range.
Mhm.
So that's the vehicles with engine, and then on the other side you have vehicles without engine, and the two primary ones are battery electrical vehicles, which is 100% operated on batteries, and then they charge like plug-in hybrids. You have to charge them, otherwise, uh, you know, you can't use them. And then you also have fuel cell electrical vehicles, which do have a battery pack, but they use fuel cells to convert hydrogen into electricity that then feeds the uh, the batteries. But that's kind of the bulk of it. There are some other stuff out there, but that is really the bulk of it.
Yeah, interestingly, you've touched on the differentiation between these vehicles, and I'd say that while most people are familiar with them, but it's important to understand what each means as well, right? So, how do you
Yeah.
define them? Now, if I link or if we are linking this to sort of the vehicle architecture, I'm sure ICE vehicles, they've been around for some time now, so they're more the traditional or conventional sort of on that side. But
Yeah.
electrical fuel cell vehicles, the sort of the newer build vehicles, they are, and where there's sort of new developments that are happening. So what I want to say is, like, with respect to architecture, we've touched upon the shift from central to zonal, which is happening. I know initially all of these ICE vehicles would have been built on central architecture, and as technology evolves or has evolved, there's been sort of this transition, sort of gradual transition, I'd say, to zonal architectures across these vehicle types, including the newer builds that we talked about, electric and hybrid. So, is there some sort of a differentiation in the architectural approaches that each of these vehicle types take? Is something that I sort of grapple upon, right? So are electric cars adopting zonal architecture
Yeah.
directly, or are they experiencing that same shift? Are they moving in the same sort of line as the ICE vehicles? Who is sort of driving the shift? Is there an electric vehicle industry or ICE vehicles influencing it as well? So how does one see this evolution happening? Like how do we break that down?
Well, the simple answer is that it's all tied to the complexity.
Okay.
So the higher the complexity, the more you're gonna want to modify your architecture
Mm.
and go towards module or zonal. So IC, it's pretty simple. It's 12 volts. Most of the things inside the vehicle run at 12 volts.
Yeah.
You go into hybrids, typically the EV piece of it runs at 48 volts or even higher. So now you're talking about two different electrical systems at a minimum, because it's easier to separate them. You go into plug-in hybrids, now you have uh, the need to have a higher speed electrical vehicles. So again, you as you go up in complexity, you have to think more and more about zonal architectures. When you think about electrical vehicles, uh, what you're talking about is, yeah, maybe the vehicle itself is more simple because it has less parts, but typically you're having a vehicle that works at very high voltage and has features like over the air updates and autonomous that just make it a lot more complicated from that point of view.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you.
So, I mean, as I mentioned, so EV vehicles, they work at a higher voltage, but there's still components that run at a low voltage. So
Sure.
that creates complexity. The other complexity is you have to have a vehicle that, or most vehicles can allow level one, level two, or level three, which is DC charging. So again,
Right.
the input is different. So not only that, but the other complexity is that you typically
Mm.
try to charge the vehicle at very high voltages, but
Okay.
running the vehicle is not as at a high voltage. So all those things create complexity. And then if you add that like fuel cells, now you also have this phenomenon of converting hydrogen into electricity. So
I see.
it's almost like the more advanced the vehicle is, the more people think about modular and zonal, just to start isolating the different systems and be able to manage them correctly and independently.
I see. Yeah, that's right. I quite agree with the direction that you've talked about. Yeah.
And just to maybe kind of close this,
Mm.
it's also tied to the user experience because again, in the example of electrical vehicles, the voltage required to power the wheels is going to be very different than the voltage required to operate the infotainment system. So therefore, even for a user, the automaker has to manage that kind of complexity. So for the user,
Yeah.
it's all seamless.
Got it. Absolutely right. Like the most, I'd say, more advanced electrical, or sorry, the electric and fuel cell vehicles that you sort of talk about are driving these demands, right? For these electrical architecture. So, in case it's more complex, then the complexity would sort of necessitate a shift towards the zonal architecture. So, would you say that the push to zonal architecture in electrical or at least these vehicles is more all influenced by the transition for ICE vehicles, or is that the right way to view
Yeah.
this trend?
Well, that's one piece of it, but it's also important to recognize that another big piece is the consumer experience. Because think about a hybrid.
Yeah.
For a consumer, they don't want to notice when the vehicle is running as an EV versus when it's running on the engine. So it's a complexity again that the automakers has to deal with, but it's really around the user experience. And again, you separate those two different architectures, so then the transition is as smooth so that they don't notice. Another great example in user experience: no one wants to notice when you're driving a car, a hybrid especially, or even an EV, when you're doing regen braking versus standard braking. So again, yes, it's about the complexity and managing the complexity, but it's also about the user experience and having the best user experience possible.
Got it. Got it. So it's definitely touches upon the benefits of this and how sort of this gets impacted in by various vehicle classes, right? So this was I'd say really interesting and insightful, Raul. We did touch upon several keynotes, and when it comes to the different vehicle types being impacted by architecture and who governs whom, and that whole aspect of the influence and the
Hmm.
transitions. So
Yeah.
I say the next episode, when we talk more specifically about customers' expectations and across different regions, it'll be helpful for many people as well. So I'd say thanks for joining me again, and I look forward to the next episode.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.